If you've been watching my channel long enough, then you know that I both love Ra and also got rid of my copy. Hi, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I didn't get rid of it because I don't love it. I mean, that's the nature of saying I love it. Ra is an excellent game that I've had in my collection for years, so much so that I played it and played it and played it again and played it again and played it long enough that eventually it became a game that did drift away from my collection, but this is gorgeous. I mean, this is the new version of Ra from 20th Century Game. This is going to be a game over on Kickstarter that features the art of the owner tool, no real major changes to the game itself, past some quality of life improvements to accessibility from the player aid. Effectively, your boards become your player aids. The game looks gorgeous. The pieces are insane. I mean, if you liked the big giant Ra marker in prior games, this thing over here is just obnoxiously insane. Like, honestly, they should sell this as a paid add-on that you can get yourself, because if you have a copy of Ra, and if you love a copy of Ra, if you love your copy of Ra, this is still pretty incredible. Now, this might seem a little all over the place in case you have no idea what's going on here. Let's dive into it. This over here is a prototype, all things subject to change. Usually I say all rules and components, but I imagine the rules are fairly locked in, as this is a reprint of an existing game. Ra from Reina Knizia has been out for quite some time, has been popular for quite some time, and that's because it is one of the best auction games out there. It's a pure auction game. The entire game revolves around an auction, but usually games like that focus purely on auction, as opposed to anything else, usually those games find themselves interweaving other mechanics in them if they're going to be a longer, heavier experience. Or you have things like High Society or other games for sale, games that have more direct auction, but they're smaller and shorter in their playtime. Ra is one of the best pure auction games out there. One of the best, more interweaving, more dedicated auction experiences that you can play. It's all about the auction. The entire game is about putting tiles down and slowly advancing the marker depending on the tiles that you draw, or alternatively, at any given point, someone gets to call Ra. There's an auction. That's all it is. The entire game is an auction. You're going to be bidding on the tiles in front of you, and you're going to be bidding on the tiles in front of you with a single bid mechanism, which adds to the tension of the experience. That single bid mechanism involves you placing your sons or taking your sons, all of which have their own unique numbers. There is no overlap, and you deciding what you're willing to bid, understanding full well that other players can and will potentially try to outbid you because you do not have an opportunity to increase your bid. Once you bid, you're locked in and you cannot go higher, you cannot go lower. Other players have an opportunity to bid ahead of you, which is one of the reasons grabbing this thing is so compelling. Because if you grab this thing, you get to go last. So sure, you give up your turn in terms of adding a tile to the market, because on your turn, what you do, the main primary actions you do every turn, is you either grab a tile from the bag, and this is the prototype bag, this is the actual bag, it's a little smaller that they're working on. But you grab a tile from the bag and you add it to the market. That's option one. Let's go ahead and grab that. We add that to the market. Woohoo, there's another building in the market. That's excellent. That's option one. Option two is you say Ra. You grab this tile and auction begins and you get to bid last, which is why it's so compelling to grab this, because bidding last gives you a lot of control in a single bid mechanism auction. Then that player goes ahead and says, I bid 8. This grouping of tiles is worth 8 to me. And then you say, well, I bid 9, it's worth 9 to me, and you get away with just paying a drop more. Alternatively, the reverse can be true as well. There's a lot of screws with the way the bids work. If this player went first, if this player grabbed Ra, I can grab 9, forcing him to give up his highest auction marker. Is the market worth that or not? Now, why are you bidding for these things? What are you getting? Well, first of all, you're also getting the last auction marker. One of the compelling things about Ra is the fact that your bid enters the market. If you bid 8 and you win 8, your bid becomes part of the next auction roundup for the next round of the game. The game takes place in 3 ages, and bidding on not only what you want, but also on what you will be able to bid next turn. That is incredibly compelling as far as what it's doing. But secondly, you're bidding on the tiles. The tiles are the primary reason why you're bidding. It's how you score points in the game. And this is where the new auction board scores things very well while giving you a handy-dandy player aid to all players at the same time. Not stuck on a central board, but rather over here instead. And this auction board is going to be dividing things into the things you score every single age and the things that you keep around. Because that's what the game's going to have. It's going to have end of age scoring and then end of game scoring. And you want to be mindful of both, because everything scores. The question is, how do they score? Buildings are going to score for having the same type of building and having all different types of building. You have different scoring mechanisms. For instance, if I have 5 of the same type of building, I get 15 points. At the same time, if I have 8 different buildings, I get 15 points. So trying to layer a combination of both a lot and different is going to give you chunks of point as you go through the buildings. Over here, for the pharaohs over here, whoever has the most is going to get whoever has the most is going to get 5 points. The least is going to get 2 points. Everyone else will get nothing. The water and flood tiles are going to score based on having each other. You see, what you have is every single flood tile, every single water tile will score if you have a flood, but alternatively, if you don't have a flood, they score nothing. So you're trying to be mindful of getting both of them in place. And these, by the way, these over here will clear every single round. If you have this little indicator here, it's going to be scoring at the end of the game. Over here, you have your god tiles, which will either be traded in for other tiles, or will be scoring 2 points each. Over here, you'll be getting 3 points for every single money tile. Over here, you'll be scoring points for having different types of people. You score either -5 points if you have no people, and if you have 3, 4, or 5 different types of people, you'll be scoring 5, 10, or 15 points, and those will be clearing. And then over here, you'll be getting 1 point for every one of your flood tiles as well. Every single one of these tiles is going to be scoring in some way, shape, or form, and it's the way you get those tiles, what you're trying to compete over, what helps you more than the other players, that are going to factor into your decisions. Now, there's disaster tiles as well. Those are tiles that will force you to clear other tiles, adding to a bit of the trick of the market itself, because sometimes you're bidding on something bad. That means you probably want to pay less, but that means all the players want to pay less, and the question is who benefits more or less from those things? Who can manipulate that part of the market in order to take advantage of what the market is offering, which is always the case in Ra. The entire game comes down to understanding that the market always is worth different things to different people, and what you are willing to bid will determine, well, what you're willing to bid. But that's the core idea. You're going to rinse and repeat across 3 rounds of play. Some tiles will be clearing every single round from your board. Other tiles will be sticking around till the end of the game, score points, and rinse and repeat. And that is basically Ra with, accessibility, player aids. We have this boat instead, which is going to be moving along the track instead of just having the tile stacked. You see some of these tiles, the god tiles in this board over here, in this bag over here, are going to be triggering. Let's see if we can find one here. Here we go, one of these. When you grab these, you're going to both advance the boat and an auction will immediately be called. So you have auctions being called either when a player pulls this out of the bag, or alternatively when someone grabs Ra, and then the game ends when that boat hits the end, or the round ends when the boat hits the end. Do that 3 times, and it leads to an interesting puzzle of a game of trying to figure out how to get your hands on the right things as often as possible with your limited suns that you can bid in this game. It's been around for quite some time. This is a reprint. It's been reprinted a few times. This is the newest reprint with possibly the best art, obviously subjective. I think a lot of versions of Ra had some amazing art in different ways and different aspects. I think the combination, again, these player pieces are obnoxiously chunky, and when I say obnoxiously, I don't actually mean obnoxiously. These are insane. It's absolutely insane as far as the chunkiness of everything. But past that, the art is very compelling, at least for myself, but that is obviously a personal opinion, which means it's a good time to dive into the review part of things, starting off with the ease of play. This is a very easy game to dive into. The rules are incredibly simple, meaning I can teach you the rules. The pure rules of the game, I can teach you in 2, maybe 3 minutes of teaching. Now, I'd have to spend a little bit more time in that because I also have to teach you what all the tiles do and how those score, which has always been one of the more difficult parts of Ra. Not difficult, but just the fact that you have to remember. For new players, you have to remember all the different things, and either you have to be referencing the rulebook, or in some iterations it was printed on the main board. Having everything over here perfectly organized and having it just so structured, it's a little more structured if you don't have the victory point tiles sitting in the middle like I have, but having everything so structured works really well. This player aid is absolutely fantastic, tracking what's being kept every round, what's being discarded every round on the left or the right side, and then telling you when something scores, both in the middle of the game across each round, alternatively only at the end of the game. So everything is beautifully printed over here, making it very, very accessible. Everything else that's larger is just nice. Having the boat move along the track as opposed to storing the Ra tiles, that you can do it either way you want. I believe they have it on both sides, so you can actually do it either option as far as storing it over here. Maybe that's going to be the final version over there. But yeah, this in general is just a solid, easy game to teach, easy game to play. No real issues with the game. It's just a solid, easy game to play. Playtime is going to come in around 45 minutes. Table space is fairly minimal. Each player has their own board of stuff, and that's basically it. As far as player count, this is a 2 to 5 player game. I've only ever played this at 3 and 4 players, despite the number. I may have played it at 5. Again, I've been playing Ra. There's this version of Ra, which is not significantly different, and then there's Ra in general. Ra is a game that I've played long enough that I don't know for sure all the player counts I've played it at. I've definitely never played it at 2, I know that. I've played it at 3 and 4 plenty of times, and it's entirely possible that I've played this one at 5. I don't recall. It's been a long time. And it plays well at all those player counts, or at least all the ones I've played it at. There's no particular player count where I'm like, that's the ideal Ra experience. It works well at all those player counts for me. I can make the argument that 3 and 4 would be better than 5, just because you have a little more control of the market as it turns around, as opposed to at higher player counts, you start becoming victim to someone's going to call Ra before you even have a chance. So possibly an argument that 3 or 4 is better, but not necessarily a strong one. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, Ra is just excellent. It's so easy to teach. The single bid mechanism is possibly my favorite part. The single bid mechanism where you have to bid a single time with an asymmetrical bid, and then that bid becomes part of the next market. That is insane. The fact that you enter your bid to the next market, which means you take back the prior bid, you put it face down, so you now have an indicator of what's going on there, of what you're going to have for the next market, and then you bid for that. It's so tight. It results in such a tight tension of when do you call Ra. If you call Ra too late, someone else will call first, and they have more control over the auction you do. If you call it too early, you may find yourself winning auctions too early in the game, being locked out of the later rounds, because what you can and will have happen in Ra is as the boat slowly moves along the track, as you finish off auctions, you'll be left with one player who has a sun left, and no one else does. And that player has more control over the market. They can keep adding things to the market. And sure, disaster tiles are a thing to worry about, but as a whole, they'll generally get more tiles because they were able to outlast other players. They'll be able to play a little bit of a game with the market, trying to pull things out before the boat advances along the track. There's such a compelling degree of tightness around this auction. Simplicity of the core rules combined with determining the valuation of the tiles at any given point, and the asymmetric nature of that valuation. Again, I talked about this already, but the fact that the market over here, the auctions that you're fighting over, are worth different things to different people is huge, because you may have the people you need. You may not need more flood or water tiles. I mean, if you have a ton of water tiles and no floods, well, you really want that flood tile, more so than I do, and so I can bid something knowing full well you'll have to outbid me, spending your 14, because if you don't, you're going to be giving up like 7 points because of all your water tiles that have accumulated across the course of the game, and you don't have the necessary flood to score them. Or the buildings. Which buildings are you going for? Are you missing that last building that's worth an extra 5 points on its own to have that last building? You have to be mindful of your own board and what other players have, and the asymmetric valuation there, combined with the asymmetric bids, combined with the fact that you're bidding for your next round's bid. Those things all lend itself to a tight, pure, clean auction game that is incredibly intricate in what it's doing. And then the sun mechanism and calling Ra, having the boat slowly move along the track, and calling Ra, and being mindful of how often you're pulling auction tiles from the bag. Are you going to let the game trigger the auction, or are you going to be in control of your own destiny? Calling Ra is such an impactful part of this game that they made a single player piece that has no other function than to just slam it down the table, shouting Ra. And it's huge, and it's ridiculous, and it's over the top, and it might seem like it's too much unless you've played this game, in which case you're thinking it's exactly the right amount. If anything, they could have made it larger, because that aspect of the game has always been so impactful. That aspect of the game has always been a huge part of the strategy of determining the control of the market, determining the control of who gets to bid last, of being able to see everyone else's decision before they see yours. It deserves this piece. That's what it comes down to. It deserves this piece. Ra is simple, it is accessible, it is pure, it is clean, it is intricate, it gives you a lot of decision space in a fairly condensed time, around 35-45 minutes, depending on who's playing, how many players, how well they know the game. It is such a ridiculously good experience, and it deserves every single reprint it has ever gotten, including this one. As far as what I don't like, to a certain extent, over multiple plays, it can be repetitive. This is why this is a game that I did get rid of after having, I don't know how many plays under my belt, a whole lot of plays under my belt across several years of play. It became a game that eventually, the core puzzle doesn't really change game to game. The core puzzle is the same. They actually have different versions. If you're someone who loves Ra, and you like that core puzzle, and you want variation, there are other games you can hunt down. Basically all of them out of print and expensive, but like Priests of Ra or Ra the Dice Game, there are other options out there that utilize the same mechanic while giving you slightly different twists to the experience, which you can certainly hunt down and try to get your hands on. Or Ra in general is out of print, which is why you can certainly try to hunt down and get a copy of that, or this copy over here. But Ra does have that degree of repetitiveness to the experience that made it a game that, despite me loving it, eventually I was ready to let go. Although I'm ready to get it back now, because again, this is shiny and pretty, which is not good for my health. But that's the only real aspect I don't like about Ra. The game is incredibly good at what it's doing, but it almost feels like an abstract game in terms of how clean it is, in terms of how lacking in anything other than the pure single mechanism of what it does that there is. As far as I can see others not liking, First of all, it's a pure auction game. If you don't like auction games, this is the wrong game to be picking up. This is a pure auction experience. Secondly, turn order luck. At the end of the day, the turn order luck can be a factor in terms of when something comes out into the market, when someone has an opportunity to call raw. If you get to call raw because you just saw that new tile that we both needed in the market, you do have some higher degree of control than I do. And as I said, at higher player counts, that can be a slightly more of an issue. And not a huge issue for me, but it certainly is a factor. If the right tile comes out at the right time, and that determines who calls raw in a way that you would have if it was your turn, but it was their turn. And so it's not an issue of them being a better player than you, it's just an issue of the way the tiles came out. Yeah, I mean, that luck should average out across the course of the game, but that can happen. This game is so tight that you may find yourself frustrated with the 1 degree of luck that's outside your control, that aspect where it doesn't come down to who made the better judgment call, it just came down to who had the right piece of information at the right time. And then lastly, the disaster tiles. There are going to be tiles in the market that clear out some of your tiles, and if you're not okay with that, again, this just isn't the game for you. This is a part of the game. I guess in theory, you could remove them from the game and play raw without those. I mean, not in theory. You could probably just remove them from the game and play raw without those. So I guess if everything else about the game you like and you just don't like the handful of disaster tiles because there's not a lot of them, then sure, you can remove those from the game if you prefer. As far as the new edition, before I get to final thoughts, not a lot of changes here. Basically, you're talking about new art, no real rules, not that I could detect having gone through rules. I can detect a single change. I didn't compare them back to back, but they seem to be exactly the same. We have better art, or better subjective. We have new art. We have new components. We have the fact that you have this auction track, the boats tracking it as opposed to the tiles being laid down instead. Just gives you another thing, whether you like that or not. And again, I believe they're including it both sides, so you can choose how you want to structure that. The fact that you have these boards over here, these player aids that function as a storage for your tiles, while also telling you how each tile operates, whether it's on the permanent side or the discarding side, and when they score. That is a huge gameplay accessibility thing that really helps over there. So that's really what you're looking at as far as the changes for the new edition. As far as final thoughts on Ra, it's a great game. It's a great game that I've had in my collection for a long time. I had my collection for years and years and years before I got rid of it, and I'm kind of happy for the excuse. I mean, when I first heard about this game coming out, I was like, there's a decent chance I add it back to my collection. Ra, like Tigris and Euphrates before, from the same designer, are both games that I love, and yet they eventually left my collection, which happens sometimes. I have a lot of games, and games have to leave and come and go as they may. But I was happy when I first heard about this reprint because I love Ra, and I don't mind the excuse to pick up a newer, prettier version and see if it gets played more often or not. It is a solid game to pull out when you have 3 or 4 players, like possibly 5 as well, and just get it to the table in a fairly short playtime with a quick, clean experience that is easy to teach, easy to play, incredibly rewarding, and just so tense and mean, and so much decision space cramped into a tiny little box and a tiny playtime. Not tiny, a relatively small playtime. Ra is just an excellent game. For me, it's a 4 to 5. A really solid experience. Really enjoy this one. I'm happy to see this one being reprinted. I'm happy to see people having the opportunity to pick this one up again. As far as other game recommendations, both focused around auctions. If you want something with auctions that's quick and clean and mean and cutthroat and by the same designer, by Reiner Knizia, you can check out High Society. It's a shorter game, it's a quicker game, it has an interesting mechanism where you can bid, and the player who spent the most money loses the game, and so that adds an interesting twist to how much you're willing to bid at any point, because you may straight be eliminated even though you got the best combinations of art pieces, and it plays in a shorter time frame, and it handles similar player counts. So if you want something quicker, more to the point, a little less depth around the overall experience while packing a lot into a small box, High Society is an excellent game worth checking it out. And if you want an auction mechanism interwoven into another game, my favorite game that has auctions in it, I'm pretty sure I'd have to go through my listings, but I think my favorite game in my collection that has auctions as a core part of the experience is going to be Cyclades. Cyclades is part of the Matago trilogy of area control games. It's, I believe, not my favorite. It's my second favorite in that trilogy. It is such a good experience, and it has auctions interwoven into the core mechanic as you use those auctions to drive which gods you get and how you're going to impact the battlefield every single turn. It is an incredible experience, and auctions are a huge part of why I find it so intensely enjoyable. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I'll have a link to the Kickstarter page down below, and as always, have a good one.